Alright, so I'm just out here right now with my family on a camping trip. I'm out here in some very scenic nature, and it's just put some thoughts in my head, and I thought I'd talk about some of them. Beautiful river right here, so if you hear anything in the background, it's just probably the rushing of the river there. But what I wanted to talk today about is something I had tweeted about earlier, which is the place that the stars now have in sort of our cultural imagination versus the role they used to play. Because I think usually nowadays when we think of planets or stars, we immediately start thinking about various sort of artistic renditions we've seen throughout our life, such as in science textbooks or in popular culture. I'm not saying those depictions are wrong or anything, but it's interesting how different our reception of the stars and planets are versus how most humans, through most of human history, viewed them. Most people in history saw them by actually just looking up at the sky. And during the night, they'd trace where all the stars were in the sky, where all the constellations were. Their idea of the planets, right? They didn't know what Saturn looked like. To them, it was a little dot of light up in the sky. And they could see and they could trace where Saturn moved, they could trace where Mars moved, right? They didn't know what these planets looked like at all in the way we now do. And so it creates a very different sense of a reception of them. I think when you're out here in nature and you're away from light pollution, right, and you look up at the sky and you see so many stars. I mean, it's amazing just how many stars there are in the sky. You start to have a very different reception of them. And it's made me think about a little bit about the role of how science has become this very sort of abstracted thing in the modern world, right? I want to contrast this with how science was seen for most of history, right? It has an important place within a much larger curriculum. I think it's sort of two examples here of St. Bonaventure and St. Thomas, how they construct their curriculums. And they're both drawing here very much from Aristotle. Right? St. Thomas lays out this curriculum where he looks at sort of 5 major groups of philosophical sciences you have to study. So he suggests you first study logic. And this would include as well rhetoric. If you look at, what is the work? His commentary on the posterior analytics, he includes rhetoric and poetics as part of the logic curriculum there. This is essentially studying the trivium here. And then you move on, you'd study mathematics and then natural philosophy, and then ethics, and then metaphysics. Then you move on to theology. So there's this sort of growing, each science building upon one another, getting more and more in-depth, getting more and more detailed into the principles of things, until eventually you have everything that can be reached by natural reason, and you move on to theology. And then you see the structure of the Summa, where it has this exitus reditus pattern. And St. Bonaventure as well, he has this work, it's in the Reduction of the Arts to Theology. He talks about how there's these 4 great lights that are brought into our intellect. There's the light of sense perception, the light of the mechanical arts, the light of the philosophical sciences, and the light of theology. It's interesting there, right? He's mentioning sense perception. This is as well connected in St. Thomas's epistemology and Scotus and everyone who's working in this period in the Middle Ages. It's that we move from sense perception before we move into natural philosophy. And I want to look very carefully at that, right? I think when we first look out at nature and we see the beauty of God's creation, we're drawn in from that beauty of God's creation to wanting to understand the principles of things. Right? We see this beauty and we say, well, how does this beauty come about? How can we understand this beauty that we see here? Or it's sort of like if you hear a beautiful piece of music, right? You hear this beautiful piece of music and you can understand, all right, it's beautiful, but I don't understand why it's beautiful. And then you might study music theory and you come to understand how the harmonies, the different notes there, and how the rhythm and so on actually creates a certain beauty there. And so you've gone from just receiving this beauty to actually coming to understand the causes of it. This is what Aristotle says, I think it's in the Posterior Analytics, is what a science is. Fundamentally, a science is to come to the causes of things. We move from the sense perception to causes, because causes are not immediately obvious to the senses. And so, once we see this beautiful order of nature here, then we want to come to understand what actually underlies this order of nature. And so we then move on from the actual just reception of the beauty of the thing to then studying natural philosophy, or now might be called modern science. I think natural philosophy, I think, would be a bit broader than modern science, because it would include certain things that nowadays would be grouped in with metaphysics. I think that's important to bring those back as well. But I think even if we were to say bring back certain principles like act and potency or the four causes to modern science, that in a sense almost wouldn't be enough, because we still tend to treat modern science in a way that's disconnected from nature. We want to start with the actual natural things, and then from that understand their principles. And then sort of the standard medieval textbook for natural science, right, would be Aristotle's Physics, where in book 8, Aristotle gives his demonstration of the unmoved mover. And as a Scotist, I might say that there are certain gaps in Aristotle's reasoning there. But regardless of what approach you take with that particular argument, right, I think those of us who work in scholastic philosophy and theology, we tend to get very obsessed with these metaphysical arguments, and we tend to look down on the physical arguments for the existence of God. But I think there's an important place for these physical arguments. They're not necessarily always absolute demonstrations or absolute proofs. Right, the skeptic's always going to be able to come up with an objection to anything that you're just using this natural science for. But I think the purpose of these things is that we first understand, right, we first see and perceive the beauty in creation. Then from perceiving that beauty, we then want to understand its principles and causes. And then ultimately, if we trace them, right, the efficient, exemplary, and final cause of all these things, we're going to end back up with God. And we're not going to have our detailed metaphysical understanding of God. We're not going to maybe understand God as infinite or as simple or anything like that. But we're going to be able to understand that basically the natural world doesn't contain the explanation for it in itself. It calls us to something higher. This is, I think, right, why the stars and the planets played such an important role in the imagination of pre-modern people. And it's because when you see the stars, you're filled with such wonder. You're called to something higher than yourselves, right? Even as we look out and we see all the stars, right? I mean, there's so many stars we can't even see, and we now know, right? We know now how far away these stars are, how amazing that all this is, right? That many of these stars even have all their own planets around them that we didn't even know about and stuff until very recently, right? There's all this wonder that we can perceive, and then we think about, right? Compare that to God, and it's all of a sudden you realize it doesn't matter how vast the universe is, it's still much closer to us in size than it is to God, because God is infinite and we're finite. And we can't even comprehend this finite creation, right? How can we even begin to comprehend the infinite God? And so yeah, I think it's very important that we sort of have a reconnection with nature itself. Important to actually be connected to nature. We wonder why we have transhumanism and transgenderism and all these different things now that are moving away from the natural order. And I think it's because we don't actually experience nature itself. We don't have an experience of being part of nature. This is sort of this dichotomy that comes into philosophy with Descartes. It's this opposition between man and nature. That man becomes the master of all things. There's a sense in which man is indeed the master of all things. But he's the master of all things in such a way that he's actually a part of nature. And it's not man as hunter-gatherer is part of nature, but man, even as city builder, is part of nature, right? If you look into the book of Revelation, we see at the end of Revelation, right, there's a city, but it's a city that has all this beauty of the natural world in it too. So it's not a city that's disconnected from nature. And I know as I'm looking up from the camera all the time, so can I turn around the camera? I guess I can just turn it like this. Just see all the beauty of the natural world out here. I'm up here on the mountains, in the Cascade Mountains. It's just absolutely beautiful to get away for a bit and get into nature and actually just experience it. And I study this stuff, right, all the time. This is my work and my school, is to study creation. And no matter how much time I spend studying creation, it's just going into creation I've been out here now for like 24 hours, and it's already just taken my breath away. And so yeah, I'll probably upload this when I get back, because I don't think I'll have enough signal out here to upload stuff. but I just thought I would talk about this for a bit. And so, yeah. Alright, so I've been walking along a bit more, and I realized something else that I should add to my initial video. I'll figure out where I'm going to edit this in later. But yeah, first of all, I just wanted to mention, I saw this beautiful area right here. Absolutely beautiful. Anyways, what I wanted to talk about here is this issue of reenchantment and disenchantment. Really, it should be disenchantment and reenchantment. I had a conversation with someone about this a few days ago, and I'm sure most people are probably aware of essentially what the sort of problem of disenchantment is. It's that, right, the world for ancient people and medieval people, really up until quite recently, was a sort of magical place. And we've become very disenchanted with the world. That the world, right, we understand the world through science, and so there's no need anymore to view the world as this magical place. Or we almost, even if we want to, can we recapture the magic, right? And a thought I was having later on then, after that conversation, was this idea in St. John of the Cross, although of course in all the spiritual authors, this idea of the dark night of the soul, or this idea of a resurrection, right? That sometimes in order to come out on the other end, you have to go through this sort of dark night where everything seems bad for a little while. And I think that's almost what has to happen if we follow the order of studies that I was laying out earlier. That's almost what we go through, right? Because when we first start with the beauty of nature, and this calls us in. We want to understand the causes of things, and then we go and we discover the causes of things through science, right, and philosophy. And then there can almost be this disenchantment with it. But now that we understand it, we have this sort of mastery over it, and it seems no longer to be magical to us. But I think the step then, the sort of reenchantment comes then when we connect it, first of all, even just in natural philosophy or in metaphysics itself, to God. But I think even more so then with theology. Because with theology then, right, we have this whole natural order. And then we realize, actually, this is part of a much grander cosmic plan that God has. That the whole world has created by God. We try to even comprehend the metaphysics of creation. How can something really be made from nothing? Right? What does it really mean for God to be infinite? I mean, these are mysteries that we can describe philosophically, right? But we can't really comprehend. I think this is what everyone who studied theology has experienced, this dark night of the soul, where you first think, right, the incarnation is this great mystery. God became man. And then you have sort of a mastery over it for a little while, and you say, all right, I can explain to you the Chalcedonian formula. All right, there's one person, two natures. I can explain to you and prove to you metaphysically this is not impossible to do. And then you have all your definitions, you have it all explained out, and you think you have control over it. And then you realize suddenly one day, no, I actually don't understand it at all. I understand the words, but I don't really understand the concepts. Because when you try to understand what each of those concepts are, what each of those words refers to conceptually, and then you try to combine those different concepts, you realize just how incompatible it seems to be. And there is this great mystery all of a sudden again to something like the incarnation or the Trinity or whatever topic in theology you're studying. I think it has to be the same thing in nature, and you really start to try to actually comprehend what you say, not write down the words, but actually comprehend it and meditate upon it, and then connect it up to everything else. And there's this reenchantment, I think, that comes as a result of that. That's right, Werner Heisenberg has, where he mentions how the first gulp of the natural sciences will make you an atheist, but down there at the bottom of the glass is God waiting for you there again. I think that's really the great mystery there, right? Is to rediscover God through the study of the sciences and passing through this. I think I want to just share this beauty again of nature where I'm at, and it's very inspiring, I think. I know my camera's not very good on my phone, so I don't know how well that's coming out. Anyways, I'll cut back to now wherever in the video I thought would be a good place to cut this in. Thank you all for watching, and again, I've recently put out a book of collected essays, actually, on the theology of creation. So if you're interested in what I'm discussing here, and you'd like to read more, I'll put a link in the description to the book. And then as well, also, as I've talked about a number of times, there's an upcoming symposium that I'm helping to organize with the St. Basil Institute for the Study of the Theology of Creation It'll be in Steubenville next year. It's going to be a great conference. We have Scott Hahn, we have Jared Goff, we have John Bergsma, we have Father Thomas Crane. We have a lot of great people. So I highly recommend, if you're a student or a scholar, consider submitting an abstract to be with us at the conference. And so yeah, thank you all for watching.